Hello, welcome to Signal Illinois. My name is Brian Lamar, your host today. Andrew DeSolis is out. Stupid Q1 work got him busy today, so I'm going to lead the charge. And I'm actually kind of excited to have you one-on-one today. Our guest today is Frank Kelly, who's been in the survey practice and panel sampling for many, many years. And he's currently the practice lead at Virtual Incentives. And I'm super happy to have you, Frank, join us. And how are you, sir?
Oh, very well. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, very happy to be here. I've
Great.
been a big fan of your podcast for many years.
Thank you very much. It's nice to have you on. And I know your background, but for our listeners that maybe don't, your background's rather impressive. I'd love if you kind of went through it a little bit.
Well, sure. I mean, just one of those, I guess, rare people that I found a passion early in my life for research panels, and I've stuck with it for a better part of 40 years. Various types of every kind of research panel imaginable, going back to the days when they were postal and telephone and moving them all to online and different types of ways of capturing the data, from dustbin panels to scanning panels to the online panels of various types. And yeah, I just audience measurement panels dabbled in and so forth. And I've worked at a number of the big companies. I worked at Nielsen for 13 years, spent 13 years with Kantar and 6 years with Ipsos. And now for the last couple of years, I've been with Virtual Incentives, helping them, steer the market research practice and help and doing a lot of research on researchers is the fun part of my job. I'm
Oh,
fielding projects every month on operational research, which has basically always been a particular interest of mine, to better understand how to engage respondents. And I think it's particularly relevant at this point in time because there's so much talk about the quality of sample
yeah.
survey samples.
That seems to be the only thing we talk about. At least it's either that or AI. I feel like, and a lot of times the combinations are that's one combination. And did you work on the Pinecone panel when you were at Nielsen?
Just a bit. I
Yeah.
collaborated with them a fair bit.
Okay.
They were a great bunch over there in, was it Lexington or Covington, Kentucky, wherever it was. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we have access to the Pinecone panel now, and we're proud of it. It's such an amazing panel, and you have your fingers in most of the panel assets in the industry. So that's awesome. It's cool to talk to you about that.
Yeah. Well, Pinecone was a illustrative of what can happen if if you have studies that people like, because most of their studies back when I was involved with it 20 years ago almost, it was just they were doing mostly like concept tests and simple stuff on sales estimation models. And they paid. So they didn't do a ton of surveys, like one a week, and they
Yep.
paid $2 or $3 or something per survey, and people were fighting to get into it.
Yeah. And it's as of recently, it's like that too. We're really proud to kind of manage that panel in that it is high incentives and high loyalty panel, and it is kind of hard to get into that panel. It's kind of the opposite of what's happening in the industry. There's not many panels like that left, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's illustrative of the issue with fraud, that people just don't appreciate. I mean, I don't know how many times people have told me that, oh, if you increase the incentives, you'll increase the fraud. And I think that's just crazy. The
Yeah.
problem is that the incentives are so low right now that people just aren't motivated to participate. And what's left are people in, developing economies and so forth that are, trying to do
Yeah.
five of them at once. And realistically, you can expand. The biggest issue I think right now is to expand the base of people willing to do occasional surveys. And to do that, you have to make the incentives meaningful. And right now they're not for most of the research panels out there.
I completely agree. I think we talked about this when we spoke recently. I wish we could measure non-response bias. It's so challenging. Maybe you've done it and they're trying to do it in the past. It's something I would love to figure out a way to do. It's nearly impossible to do with online research, I think. But I think that the population of people that are taking surveys is so small. And like you said, the incentives are so small. It gives countries like Nigeria and the Ukraine, and that's a lot that goes a lot further there.
Yeah, I tried to measure like what percentage of the population participate in panels. It was very hard to do, of course, because
Yeah.
what's a random probability?
Right.
I did it on Rewe, which has that old approach where,
Yeah, really. Yeah.
remember them, where they
Oh yeah.
those people that mistype URLs and stuff. And we came up with a number and basically it showed that there aren't a lot of people in survey panels. It really is a much more narrow group than it was, say, 20 years ago. I don't have good hard numbers on it, but yeah, we have to expand that, and quality will follow, I'm sure. I really believe that fraud can be overcome. I mean, it's really a case of broadening the appeal of the process. And and to do that, you have to have higher incentives. But the way to you have to screen the fraud by it's very. I mean, we've proven how it all worked in the past. You can do ID validation. That's current. It works very well. It's broadly available. There's all those signals that can prevent fraud. And the reality is, people don't appreciate it. I mean, there's a lot of great fraud prevention companies out there. As you know, many of them, I'm sure, and they do a good job. But they all have a set of parameters that you can set the threshold of what you consider fraud.
Yeah.
And you know, the quality of panels is a function of how high those thresholds are. And for a lot of them, those thresholds are quite low. And actually, even at the redemption side in our business, we're in the process of launching fraud prevention tools. We're finding that we catch another cat group of people that are at the redemption process with a different set of tools. So even if you've done all the right things
Oh, really?
early on, when you go to redeem, if you're not checking, because people let their guard down and so forth, so it's another great opportunity to catch some people. But I really think that there's that part of it, which is all the tools involved. There's the other part of it is motivating them to participate, and the other part of it still is if you with AI, there's new capabilities, tremendous new capabilities to foster engagement, which is really the central approach, I think, to solving the problem. Conversational AI is a terrific tool. I think that when I've done extensive research on access panels on engagement issues, there's a few things that people hate. They hate the fact that they're not paid for the screening, and so
Yep.
the way that so many I call them faux panels, fake panels, basically.
Yeah.
That just
Yes.
like
It's a lot of those.
a visage, a little bit of a panel.
Yeah.
They sprinkle a few of their own panelists in, but then they buy everything off the
Yes.
off the networks, exchanges. But yeah, so if they did a lot more engagement with AI and they could, you're doing, you get video approval, and you're doing ID validation and you're compensating them for those things because those are privacy invasions and people expect to be paid for them. They expect to be paid for their screening time, and generally they're not paid for any of those things. And
Yeah.
if they are, then you're going to get good work. I've done a lot of conversational AI work, and the biggest problem with conversational AI right now, there's a million platforms. I counted at least 30 different platforms, and they're terrific platforms. I've used a number of them, but the samples aren't designed to meet those needs. The sampling right now is geared towards either qualitative or quantitative, not for big qual. Big qual should be paid a little bit more because you're asking them to think a lot more. They're being probed conversations, they're videoed, etc. They often have to, do certain things. So my point is, we really need to see a big change in the way panels are managed over the next couple of years to create a group of premium panels that support big qual. And I think big qual is going to grow tremendously over the next couple of years, just because it is the ideal way to support synthetic data and a lot of the more automated personas, dynamic personas, and things that people are creating. It becomes an even more important in that environment to have high quality sample. And the way to get high quality sample is to, first of all, do a lot more vetting through conversational AI and video. They're a live person, that they speak the language and they're not, getting the answers from ChatGPT, whatever. And they can give you a lot of great insights. When you do that probing, that's where the real ideas come out, for innovations and things like that. And in AI, you don't need more than a couple hundred of those interviews to really get you what you need to create the synthetic data. You don't need 1,000 completes. 200 conversations is a better source of information to drive that synthetic work.
Okay. Boy, you gave me a lot of meat to work with here. We'll see how far we can get into this. I loved what you're talking about with fraud. I love what you're talking about with engagement. I really love what you're talking about with premium panels, and I think the same thing is going to happen in the industry, and I really hope it does. Is that more premium panels will emerge, and those are the ones that are going to be so much better at validation and on the engagement side. And you mentioned AI and video approval and ID validation, and I'm curious from your perspective, do you know why ID validation just never kind of took off in the panel world? Was it just too expensive? Was it not possible? Was it no demand for it because the fraud wasn't as apparent?
In a lot of panels, I've asked the question of whether they'd be willing to do it, and it's not a lot of people that are willing to do ID
Yeah.
validation for privacy concerns and so forth. they're certainly not willing to do it for a 50-cent survey.
Yeah.
Uh,
There's the big problem right there. Right.
right. There needs to be that connection between what they're paid and what they're being asked to do, and the extent of the privacy invasion. And you have to build the trust factor, you know.
Yep.
And it's hard to build a trust factor when you're bouncing them all over the internet, you know, to,
Yes.
to get them to
And,
qualify for a survey, you know.
and and not to steal your thunder, with qual, which I agree with that as well. What you're saying, the big qual is going to grow, the incentives are a lot higher. Perhaps that's a easier way to get respondents to upload an ID or send a picture of their ID, right?
Yeah, so if you, I really do think it's just an incentive thing. I think that if people know that you're a legitimate company, that pays them a few times, you know, then they'll say, okay. You don't ask them the first time out, you know, when they're joining. You ask them, you know, several steps down the road. But people are willing to do it for the right compensation. And even that, you know, like one of the biggest things that's nobody seems to be talking about, but a huge business is developing around AI training data. And that industry, which is, they pay really well. They're paying, you know, $10, $20 an hour for people to do various ask things to check, you know, compare the quality of what AI is producing versus a human, to give some human thought to it.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest challenges they're doing is they've done the EID validation, and then people are selling their approved account to somebody in another third world country. So
Oh,
it's just another kind of fraud that's happening, and it's a big issue in that. And so we're supporting some of those clients, and in the end, we're doing the ID validation again at redemption, and
and it may not match. Is that? Uh,
you get
oh
people
my!
that can't do it, you know, because
Oh,
they've
Frank,
sold their account and they're getting, you know, the person that sold their account either got paid once or gets paid a percentage. You know, they got all these different scams out there.
you
It's
ruined
so
my weekend.
no, I'm just saying that, you know, the whole idea of fraud is you have to do it on a regular basis, prevention
Yes.
at all different points in the process. It's not going to go away. Increasing the incentives will broaden the appeal to more people, but you still have to maintain a very rigorous process to control that the people are who they say they are. Now, one of the most interesting things that I think uses of AI, and it's something that I saw the press release recently for you guys with Qualtrics doing on the
Yes.
profiling side. I really believe that one of the best things you should do, and it's going to be the new way that panels are going to be run. I mean, for years I managed dozens of profilers. You know,
Yeah.
you build 20 profiles, you're trying to translate them and running them in 20 countries, 30 countries,
Yes.
and figure out, do I have enough people profile to, you know, back in the old days, we used to manage it that way. You know, oh, it looks like we're going to be doing a lot of automotive work in Germany, so let's do our
Yep.
automotive profile.
Prioritize the auto profiler.
Yeah,
Yes.
and we used to pay for it back
Yep.
10+ years ago. Some of the companies was out. Now people got away from all that, you know, and they don't do that anymore, and that's been a real problem, which is why people are spending so much time screening that they're not compensated for, and that's where a lot of the quality's gone down because a lot of people are pretending to have, yes, I own a whatever car. My point is that the new approach to profiling that we're going to get to sometime over the next year or two is the default profiling will be a conversational AI conversation where you might say, okay, I know I got these projects coming up and so forth,
Yes.
and let's see if they might qualify for, oh, you know, all the trackers that you have coming, you know, you've got 10, 15
Yeah.
trackers you're going to be running the next few weeks. Let's see if they might qualify for them, and just have it through a conversation, and then have that AI tool kind of summarize that data in some kind of, I don't know how exactly they would structure that data, but in a way that they could then use that to sample the people you need based on some real data. So bringing back meaningful profiling with the help of AI, I think will be a real tremendous benefit to the quality of our research in the future.
Again, you're giving me so much for me to work with. Conversational AI. Can I take a step back? Do you mean an AI? What I would like a virtual human being having a chat conversation, or is that a video conversation with an AI moderator, or it could be either of those?
Yeah, so the conversational AI platforms pretty much all debuted with text based. It's a text going
Yes.
across, and you're answering. You know, so you're open text answering instead of closed end survey. So it's like a open ended survey on steroids because it's got probing, some really
Yep.
sophisticated probing. Then some of them move to voice because, you know, a lot of those things are being on mobile and typing. You know, several sentences for each answer is kind of a pain. So that was an improvement. But now, over the next year, they're all going to move to video. I mean, because that's people want a clip at the end. You know, you can remember in the days back 10 years, 5, 8 years ago, whenever when we were all doing like Vox Pop Me and Big Sofa and all those companies, you know, we're creating those. There was a lot of work. I was doing some of that too.
Not a work.
It was a lot of work, but now that stuff's all automated. They can just
Yeah.
screen through and get the key points and boom, boom, and create a video clip for you of the key points and on any topic you want. You can say, let's talk, you know, give me all the clips on this. And so I really think that there's going to be a real push for more and more video. And video, only about at best half of the population out there are willing to do video in today's world with the incentives the way they are. So again, you need this premium sample of available that's pre-profiled, they're willing to do video, they're, you know, they have something to say that, you know, and that's the other thing about what I like about AI, you know, instead of this kind of like post hoc, you know, straight lining tools and all this other, all that stuff that we do, some of it's maybe real time, but most of it's post hoc. AI will, you know, if the conversation isn't going well, they say, look, you're not answering our questions, we're going to close this interview. You know, the surveys are incomplete. They don't even get to the finish line. And so you're left with much better clean data, you know, and in my experience working with some of these platforms, I'm finding they also give you the incomplete survey, so you can see the people that don't really have much to say and why it's telling why it stopped them, you know, and it's not included in the data. So it's informative, and well, I think it's
Well, I'm curious, the conversational AI profiling that you seem pretty confident, and I agree again, that this is kind of the momentum in panel profiling. Do you foresee that as you built, let's say we've already built the trust with the panelists and we're having a conversation with them. Is it, hey, tell me about how's the last 3 months of your life been? Are you expecting a new baby? Did you buy a new house? Did you buy a new car? Any major purchases? Have you taken a trip? Those types of questions, and then you kind of drill down and probe to try to get to the exact profiling points we typically look for in a survey. Is it something like that?
yes, you know, it's going to be a natural flowing conversation, which is really something that people will appreciate much more and more willing to do. And yes, you know, ideally you brief the AI tool on the work that you have forthcoming and the things that you need to know, and it gets to know over time where the demand is for respondents. So it doesn't maybe, and the other thing is there's a lot of cross correlations that people, you know, if you know that somebody owns a pet, right, a dog, you know that they have there's a better than 50% chance they use plug-in air fresheners. You know, I'm just saying, whatever it might be, there's a lot of things that AI can figure out over time. Oh, this people are more likely to qualify than those people, and so it's a different way of sampling that, you know, we've tried to do this years ago, but just got too complicated. We didn't really have the tools at the time, but
Now we have the tools.
the tools are there now where they can see, okay, this person should fit the profile of this particular product based on, again, maybe you do the first 50 interviews and you find, and then you look at the profiling data you have on those 50 people, say, okay, now select me another 50 people, you know,
Right.
and there's lots of good questions about, is that good sampling method, but to talk about bias and stuff, I mean, it's probably a lot less biased than most of the things that we're doing today.
Oh, yes. I just want to get to real people.
Yeah.
Then we can, you know, we don't talk about bias at all, unfortunately, because I love talking about bias.
Yeah.
I just want to get to real people, and then we get to engaged respondents that are real people, and then we get about reducing and eliminating bias. You know, we're unfortunately at kind of the crawl stage. I think we've kind of reverted back to some challenging times in survey research, unfortunately. Let's talk more about the redemption side, because that's what you're doing now is at virtual incentives. I don't work a ton with incentives and or the redemption side, other than just kind of studying and asking respondents what works. Curious what your thoughts are on what you've learned at virtual incentives, any advice you have for people with incentives beyond revalidating people, which is that's an insight for me for sure.
Well, sure. So, you know, it's one area where I think that people don't put enough thought into. You know, it's sort of
That's
like an
right.
afterthought. You know, okay, we've got something organized, and they just let it run for 5 years. When, you know, things move, fintech world, financial technology world has moved a lot in the last few years. I mean, it's truly amazing to me now compared to even a few years ago. You know, in 3/10 of a second, I can incentivize anybody pretty much anywhere in the world with a half a dozen many different options, whether it's bank transfers or a Visa card or thousands of gift cards or PayPal or you name it. And so those capabilities have really come a long way. But some people are still frozen back in time where all they have is they buy some Amazon cards and maybe have connection with PayPal and they think, oh, that's good enough. But you know, I've done enough research that indicates that, well, people have preferences. They do like, to be treated. They like to have a treat, with earn a special amount of money on the side, a side gig, side hustle, and they want to use that $25 for, I don't know, a restaurant voucher or something that they might not otherwise go to, and so it's about experiencing things, and that's the way you make it memorable too. Is if people have a positive experience about what they earned from doing something on your panel, it reflects well on you. And I'm really a big fan of the tap to pay and all that with your branding coming up because you can just push things right to a Visa card, and
Yeah.
that gives you all the flexibility in the world. You can spend the money anywhere, and um, I've been using it. I managed to get incentivized a few times for some things.
Yeah. Yes.
And that, always tapping to pay. Up comes my brand. Oh, thank you, virtual incentives.
That's right.
But it could be your brand, your panel brand, or whatever. Yeah. So anyway, I think that the incentive business has come a long way. I think people don't appreciate how important it is to have variety, and people don't appreciate, in some cases, that it's easy to make it seamless and smooth. It should be a really simple journey. A pleasant experience, the redemption process, and so forth. And some companies still kind of make it a little bit more difficult than it needs to be, just to kind of create some friction and some breakage, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wrong approach. And so as I've been advocating, make it as easy to redeem as possible, make it a rewarding experience, and you'll people will think much better of your company in general.
Well, that was kind of you kind of hinted at my next question, which is around breakage strategy and redemption thresholds. A lot of companies do that as another way to prevent fraud. We may not trust you until you reach a certain level of surveys that you've taken, right? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there's no question that as soon as you put your incentive level down to like $5 or something, you get a whole bunch of people that are chasing those, quick redemption things, and before they get caught. So yeah, you have to have a good fraud prevention tool in place if you want to do low threshold incentives. However, I've also done a tremendous amount of research with young people. Everybody knows that young males especially, but young people in general are the hardest ones to get to
Yep.
participate in surveys. And young people in many of the bigger panels where the thresholds above $10, they never get there.
Right.
And
Right.
they're constantly replenishing that group and spending good money, $5 or a pop or more for these young guys to get them into a panel, and then they only stay for a couple of surveys and then they're gone. My point is that they disproportionately they skew much, like less than half their redemption point tends to be right at the threshold, young people, whereas older people will hang on to $50 or $100. They'll hang on for 2 years before they cash out. So by putting a higher threshold, you're making it more difficult to get the younger people to participate, and that's counterproductive in many cases.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we've done that's with some of our clients that's been very successful has been introducing gaming credits
Yep.
at a low threshold where you can use them for, because a lot of younger people just love that, particularly males. They
Absolutely. Yeah.
they cash out, oh, I need another $5 worth and whatever. I'll go do a few surveys.
Yeah. That's been my favorite thing that the industry has done to kind of attract younger males is that gaming credits. And Google consumer surveys, I don't think they do this anymore, where they used to not let you read an article unless you took 10 questions of a survey. I think
Yeah.
that was a decent way of trying to do it, but most panels don't have access to Time Magazine's content and put a wall in front of it. Unfortunately, because we're stuck with we have so many limitations with what we can do for an incentive.
Yeah, well, so micro incentives is another approach that some companies have taken. Was that 1Q and a few other of these companies that
Yep.
you know,
Quarter at a
um,
time, 50 cents at a time. Yep.
yeah, and it's another strategy. It works okay. The challenge, of course, is there aren't too many things that are quick and where the redemption cost doesn't when you get down to like $2 or $1 incentives, you don't want to have a 50% 50 cent fulfillment fee on that or something.
Exactly.
So so you got to kind of figure that out. But I think the capability is certainly there, particularly, maybe Amazon, they'll go down to like $1 or something like
Yep.
$2. And PayPal, you can do anything you want. And I don't know, it might cost you 25 cents or something for fulfillment. So I wouldn't make it as everything, but sometimes just to prove that you're actually going to pay them, maybe do it for the first few times and then say, all right, now we're going to introduce a threshold of $5 or something that's more reasonable. But
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, if it's the purpose is to prove that you're legit, you know, and that's the thing. Most of the time, I would rather people do a $5 say minimum threshold, but then pay them a couple of dollars for their time in profiling up front, so that they maybe not enough so they can just do the profile and cash out. They have to do
Yeah.
one paid survey, but you know, pay them $1 for ID validation, pay them $2 for profiling, and then make them do a couple of surveys, and then they can cash out. And
Well,
people will be fine with that.
one thing I've loved that you've done throughout this conversation is you've really talked a lot about kind of customization of incentives. So different types of incentives for different types of people, when to pay out, when the threshold is, how they leverage it, studying it. So I think that is certainly an under discussed aspect of the research process is the incentives, which are so important. And um, I want to kind of summarize what we talked about with fraud, but is there anything else with incentives that you'd like to talk about?
Um, just that you need an incentive strategy, and that sounds
Yeah,
like it's like when I first started talking to clients, they're like, "What do you mean incentive strategy?"
right. Yeah,
but I mean, people need to understand what they're going to be rewarded for, and fairness is like a big issue for a lot of people. Like they want to be treated fairly, and they don't feel like, especially when they're getting thrown out there to the exchanges and bounced around, they don't feel like they're being, the issue that all too often you might start a 10-minute survey, but then screen out of it and end up in a 20-minute survey, but you get compensated for the first one you started, and so it's not a fair deal. So fairness is late screen outs were one of the biggest complaints, and LOIs longer than what they had originally been agreed to pay for. So if you could find a way to make it fair, I created this thing I called the Research Engagement Manifesto,
okay, nice.
which
I love
which
I
is
love manifestos.
yeah, it's it's a concept where there just has to be a direct connection between the amount of privacy invasion and the amount of compensation, the length of the interview and the compensation, the amount of cognitive load, how much you're asking them to think versus and how much you're paying them. And because right now, like I say, with all these new tools and all these new data scraping and other privacy invasion things, we're being respondents are being asked a whole lot of things that hadn't been asked in the past, but not enough
Yep,
people are adjusting the
right.
incentive and compensation. Everything is straight LOI. Length of interview is all that matters in incentivization for almost everybody out there. When that is just one of 4 or 5 components that are important from the
Yep,
respondent's perspective. If they're going to
absolutely.
participate, the topic, we all know some topics people just don't want to deal with, and they're going to have a lot higher dropout rate, so that should be affected. That should be impacted in the level of the incentive. If it's on something like politics that people love to talk about, sure.
Yeah,
If it's about healthcare or finance that
yeah,
you don't like to talk about,
yeah,
increase their incentive 50%. And these are all known things. Everybody knows that these
yeah.
projects, these trackers, these wave studies they're very hard to do. And they always think about that. Oh, yeah, this one's a real pain to feel, but they're not thinking about it in terms of, well, and maybe I should adjust the incentives up 50% and make it, so that people don't feel cheated when I got a bad rap. I got stuck on this
Yeah.
survey. So yeah, that's the way I think people need to think about their incentive strategy. It should be fair compensation, an agreement up front. I'm going to pay you, whatever, $5 an hour, and which sounds like not very much, but it's a lot more than people are getting today doing surveys. You know,
Yes.
and these are the, I'm going to adjust up the survey payment if we require video, if we require, you know, download an app or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's the key thing that people aren't doing. They're not dynamically adjusting incentives. They're just going off of one grid that says LOI,
Yep.
incentive low. And that's not the right approach. And it's going to become increasingly important that they do that, because like I say, in 6 months time, half the surveys that people are doing are going to have, or all the surveys people are going to have probing and,
Yeah.
and different, facial coding and all kinds of things.
Right. It's fantastic. I've been trying to summarize a little cheat sheet here on how to greatly reduce fraud, and I'd love your thoughts on this. These are mostly your ideas, and so how to greatly reduce fraud. Number one, recruit properly, use fraud detection, pay at the screener, pay well, engage surveys. Ideally, we're using some sort of conversational AI to help profile and get the right surveys to the right people. Then you build trust throughout this process. ID validation, include video as well for validation, ID validation again at redemption, and an incentive strategy both at the survey level and at the redemption level. Those things will greatly reduce fraud in the industry. There's probably a few more that we didn't touch on, but those are a couple of those things I don't think the industry is talking about at all. And we talk about data quality, we talk about fraud prevention all day long, and I think there's certainly a couple insights in there that you led, and I appreciate that. Is that fair? Did I summarize that okay?
Yeah, no, that's a great summary. I think that's, and I think you're right. There's too much preoccupation with just tools, and
Yes.
and not enough with
Yeah.
strategy. It just the right approach, a fair compensation strategy, and that will make a big difference. I really believe, and I
Awesome.
think it's going to be essential because, like I said, the current strategy for quantitative panels is not going to support big qual, and big qual is going to grow, and the sample sizes are going to get shrink. They don't need to be as big as they are if we're having more in-depth conversations. So there's a chance to pay, to pay a little bit more incentives for a smaller sample size, and again with AI amplifying a smaller number of interviews into broader conclusion. It's really important. The quality of those interviews becomes more and more important. When you get 1,000 completes on a quant survey, a little bit of noise you can kind of ignore, but from bad survey quality.
Yeah.
But when it's being used to train the personas and so forth, and to create a lot of synthetic data, I think it's a lot more risky if you don't pay attention to the quality.
Absolutely. Well, Frank, it is an honor to talk to you. You're a legend in this industry, so thank you for all you've done in the panel space. And if people want to reach out to you, you're pretty active on LinkedIn at Virtual Incentives, Frank Kelly. And if they want to reach out to you, they have additional questions about any of this, engagement, incentive strategy, you're the right person to talk to. So again, thank you so much for coming on. It's a great conversation, especially because I know you're getting on a plane in a few hours to go to Bangkok, which is no short flight from Boston, right?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to changing weather.
Yeah, there you go. There's the positive. And thank you so much again, and have a great day.
Hey, thank you.
All right.
Take care.